I heard a claim recently that caught my attention. The claim was that there was no such thing as a conservative Bible scholar. And I thought, wait, did this person really say that? So then curiosity got the best of me and I watched the video. In the video, the claim is really built around the idea that educational institutions that have statements of faith restrict and even demonize those who teach against that said statement of faith. The claim is that this leads to scholars acting in bad faith and fudging their findings so they don't get fired. The way the video is framed is that liberal scholars are the only real scholars, and that they're the only ones without biases baked into their studies. Further in the claim is that conservative scholarship is just made up. It's made up so Christians can feel better about their beliefs, like it's some type of apologetics program. I'd love to hear what N.T. Wright, Dan Wallace, D.A. Carson, and Bruce Metzger, who mentored none other than Bart Ehrman, would say about this. Check out my reaction video for further context, but today on Cloud and Fire, we're going to talk this through and see if we can figure out who has the bias, or maybe more important, whose bias is more egregious. So filters off, let's break it down. Hey everybody, I'm Kelvin, and this is Josiah, and you are watching Cloud and Fire by Kelvin's Faith Unfiltered. We are actually trying to work on going live on TikTok as well, so I'm going to take us a quick second here to introduce the topic today and kind of get us kicked off. So Josiah, did you happen to watch the video that we referenced earlier?
I did.
Yeah, so what did you think?
Yeah, it was a pretty well made video. He seems to be, competent in producing his content. I thought it was interesting. He made some decent points. Definitely some things that are worth discussing. That being said, I thought he did have some holes there, and there was particularly how he framed the historical context. Perhaps it was just the limit of his, the length of the video, but it seemed a bit reductionist to me as well. He's definitely framing the history of it all in a specific way, and that's, I don't think, tells the whole story.
Well, what's funny, and by the way, hello everybody there on TikTok. Thank you for joining us. I'm actually going to go backwards for a second because we both have a history with that kind of crosses. And Gary North's documentary, if you will, on the hidden 20th century. Do you recall that?
I do not.
So he addresses the Scopes trial in length, which was a big part of what the video that we're talking about addressed. And there's some crossover. I mean, you texted me, I hope that I can reveal this, but you kind of texted me the other day, like, well, he kind of proved that evangelicalism has really given us some problems that we have to address, right? I think you said it a little bit more firmly, but there's truth there. There's certain things that we could agree on, unfortunately. The conclusion is just that he definitely oversteps. I mean, some of the exaggerated language he used at the end, gross, and there was almost like an entitlement. If I go to college for this degree, everyone should hire me. And one of the main points that I made was, in every field there's diverse viewpoints, right? Like, by the way, no one's going to come on our show and be a part of it that's a devout atheist. Like, every field has philosophical differences. You know, in banking, there are people that just don't have similar viewpoints on work ethic and so forth, and don't get the job. So, I thought there was a lot of that in the video baked in, but you know, I want to kind of to take a step back, because I get a lot of comments on these videos as though I'm trying to address them on that person's level. I'm not a critical scholar. Now, I'm going to tell you all up front that for about almost 4 years now, I went into a really deep study of deconstruction and critical scholarship. So when people send their comments in and they're like, well, you didn't read this or you don't know that, it's like, yeah, I did. I've read more of Bart Ehrman than I think Bart Ehrman has read of himself. Okay. I've read Peter Enns. And I love how everybody wants to talk about Dan McClellan. He's written one book. Now he had a paper that he wrote, his doctoral dissertation has some popularity and acclaim around it, but he really is what we would call a popularizer. Okay. Yeah. So he's taking data, the scholarship, and this is his words. He's trying to bring, scholarship to the mainstream. He's trying to bring it to people. And I think that we need to understand that means, sorry to say it, but he's not considered the elite of scholars by other scholars. Well respected.
I don't know that I've ever heard somebody that I would consider a proper scholar call themselves a scholar.
He does every video. Every video starts with, "Hi, I'm Dan McClellan, and I'm a scholar of the Bible." That
was the same vibe that I got from.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure I know what was.
I put it in the video. I'm not going to try to say that name over and over. But
what was his first name?
Well, it's CJ. But
CJ. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So when we talk tonight, we're not trying to say that we are sitting down as scholars and we are comparing. We're working from the same playing field. We want to look at the actual presuppositions that go into methodology, because truthfully, I don't think that's getting addressed a lot, you know, in a lot of the fields that we encounter. Medicine sometimes is like this. Absolutely. Politics. And so that's an issue. That's what we're trying to look at. And we all should be able to engage in this conversation. So if someone gets on and is like, you don't have a degree, you didn't do this, so you can't comment on this, you're in the wrong place, because that's exactly what we should do. Dan McClellan's book is not a scholarly work. Self-proclaimed, it is a popular level book. So if it doesn't convince the popular level reader, then it's failed to do its job. And there were things that were obvious that were glaringly showing his bias, even though all he does the whole time. I think you have to watch for someone who constantly says, "I don't have a bias and I'm just looking for the truth." If you have to say it over and over, then you're revealing that you're trying to hide something.
Yeah, that's. I happened to see today on Facebook, somebody had posted in one of the groups I'm part of about vaccines, and the responses were as disheartening as you would expect. Now,
you remember, you can't say too much or they will literally shut us down.
I know. But
no pressure or anything.
Where I'm going with that on as regarding our topic, the number of comments from moms, all moms, who were basically saying, "Well, I trust science. I love my children, and I don't think I'm a doctor." There were several comments where it was just like, "I don't think I know better than my doctor, and therefore I'm smarter than you." And it's a vicarious thing. It's interesting when we try to kind of denigrate ourselves by saying that we aren't the authority, but we're actually trying to kind of assume group authority. It's a very, I'm sure sociologists would have a name for it, but it's just really interesting when you want to be a part of the crowd so badly, but what you're asserting is that kind of you aren't. It's weird.
Well,
weird.
Here's the deal. We hear this all the time about what you just said. whether you think that you are smarter than your doctor or whatever field it is that you're looking into, you're still going to be accountable for all of those. So, whether it's medical and you take the advice or don't take the advice, you really need to be thinking about it.
We're all trusting somebody at the end of the day, as we make decisions, but we definitely can't just shut our brains off.
We should be looking for the bias in said opinions, and
the medical field is really, I think that's a good comparison for the theological world,
especially when it changes constantly. I mean,
there's always money involved.
Well, one of the things that I think the comparison to that. So a lot of what you hear, there's a lot of claims that conservative evangelicalism has the bias, right? And that's impacting that. That was the claim, basically, is that they got beat in the Scopes trial, and therefore they made up. If you haven't watched the video yet and you're kind of a little lost, let me give you kind of the backstory. Maybe that would help a little bit. The backstory is the video that I reacted to. It came out last Thursday, so go check that out, but not right now. The concept is that he said, basically, there's no such thing as conservative scholarship. Conservative scholarship came out of the fact that during the 1920s, when the Scopes trial occurred, that evangelicalism at the time and fundamentalism at the time had lost so badly during the Scopes trial, which was, if you don't know what that is, I could try to give you a real brief summary, that they looked so bad and backwards that they retreated and basically excluded themselves from society, and they stepped away and had no interaction with scholarship and really mainstream anything. They
were embarrassed. He used that term quite a bit.
Right, yes. And then years later, they kind of rejoined the fold, but had invented their own way of looking at things. They were trying to use the same method, but say they came to different conclusions. And because of statements of faith, it restricted the conclusions that they would come to. So they were acting in bad faith and basically coming to conclusions that were predetermined. So let me give you examples, because that's really a wide, a generalization. So let's talk about, like, for example, miracles, right? Miracles are all throughout the Bible. To prove a miracle is kind of difficult to do. So they were applying during this period of time, critical scholarship, the general methods to how they would look at history and texts from the past. And when they would do that, they would obviously disprove a lot of things or say that, well, this doesn't seem probable. Well, they decided that they were going to take, and this didn't come about until the 1800s, basically. They started to look at the Bible the same way that they would look at any other text. And so they're going, well, if we apply these same methods, this doesn't seem probabilistic. Well, for anyone who understands what a miracle is, you have to have uniformity, right? That which is normal. And if you assume that that's the only thing that can happen, then you can't have a miracle. Well, they say, well, we didn't assume that you can't have a miracle. They were basically saying if we had one, you'd have to have a really high level of evidence and proof for us to say that it happened. And in all reality, there's no way something 1,000 years ago you could give enough evidence. I mean, I don't know if people out there know who Matt Dillahunty is. He's a famous atheist agnostic. Forgive me, he'll critique you if you don't say it exactly the way he wants it. But he says literally, I don't know what proof you could give me that would make me believe. Well, that seems problematic.
I do. It doesn't exist.
But that's the point, is that how do you prove a miracle if when you go into it, you have a naturalistic historical view? You're always going to be looking for what's more probabilistic. Well, everything's more probabilistic. If you believe in a uniformity of nature, a natural historical view that miracles don't exist, that everything goes the same way no matter what, there's always going to be a more probabilistic answer than God did it. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. That's the big presupposition in this conversation. I don't know how I would prove to someone other than from the impossibility of the contrary and getting into presuppositionalism. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought again, there were decent points in the video. It's definitely worth watching. It was about a half an hour. I think some of his criticisms were valid when considering maybe the particular background that he came from. And that's where we talked about evangelicalism. That term is almost not helpful anymore. I would consider myself evangelical because I believe in the gospel and I believe that it's important to preach the gospel. But evangelical now is kind of a capital E.
Can I ask you a question? Is fundamentalism a better term? Like, who is he really addressing? Because I mean, so let me.
That was his historical, summary was very much aimed at a very specific group of American fundamentalists,
which is very difficult for both you and I. If you haven't noticed, our actual description is Reformed, postmillennial, Bible teachers, and faith commentators. We don't fit into the category that he described, but he would probably, based on our views, be as critical of us as he would those others. But if we really broke that down,
it seems, and I've talked to people that I grew up with, and they may not be aware of this, but I've talked to people that I grew up with who have left the faith, and it's clear that what they have rejected is a particular brand of fundamentalist evangelicalism that is, does run away from the fight many times. That does basically, I have talked to people where they're like, yeah, if you read these books, you are even like the church fathers, right? Anything kind of outside of their particular tradition, that you're basically going to be excommunicated, right? At least, in practice, if not in reality. So there definitely are.
Explain that a little better. What do you mean there? Church fathers?
For instance, I have talked to I have interacted with fundamentalists, particularly like your independent fundamentalist Baptists, who would not read the church fathers. And most of them are not going to be so explicit.
Is that because they still tie them to Catholicism? I don't understand.
It really is a culture of fear. It really is a culture of,
So let's break this down so that we get everybody on the same page, because we are all over the place, and that's good. Good conversation. What do you mean when you mean a fundamentalist? So they're supposed to be like, this is something that came out of the early 1900s. There was 5 key views, right? Maybe I should even just pull them up, but go on with how you were driving.
When I use the term fundamentalist, I'm using capital F, the group that historically, and it's hard to say the group because it's lots of different groups, but the mindset or the thought process that came out of the movement of the fundamentals back in the early 1900s.
Fundamentalism has 5 key views: biblical inerrancy and infallibility, 1, the virgin birth of Christ, Christ's substitutionary atonement, Christ's bodily resurrection, and the historical reality of Christ's miracles. And in some, they list the second coming replaces miracles as the 5th item. So in other words, the number might not be 5, but can I tell you a quick story? No one really cares, but so Amber and I were still dating. That's how long ago this was. And we were driving around in my old neighborhood, and we literally came across a church tent meeting. And this was during my real conversion into the Reformed faith, right? I'm like, yeah, we have to go to. I'm like, there's no way. Amber, you can add in the comments if you remember this. So we pulled it, and there was no way I was going under that tent. It was loud enough. So we pulled in, and we literally sat there. I don't know, listened to a good half hour of it. And the guy was actually breaking down fundamentalism. And I was like, this is interesting, because On the surface, this is the problem. I don't see anything in there that I would disagree with.
No, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know that I would describe some of it. And there's these ancillary parts that are connected to it. So again, I'm going to read it one more time. Biblical inerrancy and infallibility. Pretty common. That's a confessional thing. The virgin birth of Christ. Okay. Christ's substitutionary atonement. Although what's funny is the majority of fundamentalists, there's a big bifurcation, right, between the Reformed faith and on what the atonement is. So I argue they don't have a substitutionary atonement. Sorry. I'm just going to let that one out of the bag. Christ's bodily resurrection. I'm good. The historical reality of Christ's miracles. And the second coming, if you're adding a sixth, I don't have an issue there. But what are some of the things, let's talk about some of the things that get tied to fundamentalism.
Well, it was a reaction. It was a reaction to particularly like German neo-orthodoxy that was rejecting everything that historical Christianity had stood for by and large. And he mentions in his video, Corthwaite mentions in his video that some of the Germans and other groups, I would say Anglicans are represented here as well. Many of the theologians basically stopped trying to engage with the critical scholarship and made Christianity more about moralism or mysticism or something other than historic, something other than a faith rooted in true history.
Okay.
And that was a good point. I mean, he's kind of absolutely right there. There were a lot. I have read Anglicans in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it kind of shows you how they got where they're at today. But they really divorced theology from history. They divorced really theology from taking a literal reading of the scriptures at all.
Red flag. I call a flag on the field. Don't be using that term literal, because you're going to get us into the bad realm of, literal in what sense? So flag on the field. You're going to have to explain it if you're going to say it. Oh, yes.
When I say literal,
squirm. Go ahead.
In that context, what I mean is they're not really basing their theology on scripture.
Well, okay. All right. So let's try this. How about this? When it's supposed to be literal, we take it literally.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I wasn't talking so much in a hermeneutical sense, more as in when you're writing your systematic theologies, are you basing them on the Bible? Not that Anglicans wrote a lot of systematic theologies to begin with, but is your Christianity fundamentally based on the scriptures or not? And a lot of the mainline denominations became social clubs over time. The social gospel became really big in the early 1900s into the mid 1900s. And, you don't really have to believe in the resurrection. You don't really have to, we're not going to fight about theology. We're just going to do nice things. That's kind of what I mean when I say literal, view of scripture. It's more about are you actually in any way trying to build your theology around the scriptures?
Yeah, and so let's talk about the movement. We talk about like this is settled, like this is science. That's actually one of our criticisms to the actual method. So basically what happened in the 1800s is you had what was called German higher criticism. And the movement was basically say, we're going to treat the Bible like we do any other historical document. That on the surface just seems, well, yeah. But if you really think about that, what are you bringing to the table when you do that? You have to ask yourself, what was the motive to do it? The Bible in its form. And don't start with the McClellanites and, well, which Bible are you talking about? For 1800 years to this point, you have a pretty consistent Bible. So what was the motive? There's a change in culture in the 1800s that is widely documented, especially with evolution being brought about. So what are the motives? There was a period of time, and you can see it's only grown, where really we just felt like the God of the Bible had become archaic. His ways of doing things just weren't cutting it anymore.
It's called the Enlightenment.
So what do? Well, let's start treating it like a normal book, and we're going to grade it along with all the rest of them. And that's where you start to get these things where they're looking to pull at threads. And that's what they did, and they've been doing it since then. The problem is that it isn't like any other book. First of all, it's, all the things that I really want to say, I hear their little voices in the back of my head saying, well, I can't say it that way because if I do, I already know what their response is. But I guess at some point you just have to say what it is. It's written over X amount of years by X amount of authors. Notice I'm leaving them out so I don't hear in the comments. And it's covering a wide range of topics and genres. And so therefore, I don't know anything else that compares to it. If I'm missing it, help me. Is there anything that compares to that?
The question, and this is where you and I, as presuppositionalists, would not try to fight him on his own ground, would not try to approach it in the same way. As I'm watching his video, I'm thinking to myself, is the Bible unique? He is going to say no. He comes to studying the Bible with that fundamentalist assumption. Whereas I believe, and we both heard this a lot at school, part of the reason I believe so strongly in Christian education is because I cannot approach a study of God's creation without assuming the existence of God and working from there, or else I have already failed to honor the Creator.
Okay, let's talk about that. And just be honest, let's actually have a conversation about this. What does that mean? And are we being biased in an inappropriate way?
Well, it's
or an ineffective way?
Yeah.
Because I know what my answer is, in a sense, but let's play it out for a second. If you said that about anything else, what would your thoughts be on that? I think that you have to get back to the Van Tillian view of presuppositionalism and the transcendental argument for God. That when we say that that's our starting point to studying God's creation, that doesn't mean that we don't have a grounding for it.
Yeah.
It is.
That we just want to believe it, and so
right.
We're just going to...
But that's the claim. And that's unfair because I can make the same claim towards them. If you look, and again, years now of study into this, tons of books, watching to see where this deconstructionist movement comes from. It's always something that they just don't like. If they come to you and say, well, I looked at it honestly and it just didn't add up, what that means is it didn't connect with them. It is often, and I mean, I keep studying it, looking for like a much more pure, honest form of it so that I could address it on an intellectual level. And I'm sure that it's there. I don't want to degrade someone who actually has that view. But it truly does come down to a few key areas. Politics, views on racism, views on homosexuality, right? And views on God's just a mean old man. You're really dealing in that form. Like if they had a fundamentalist type statement, it's really gonna revolve around that. And so don't tell me that you came to it and were honest. It just didn't connect with now. it's connected with, Christianity back to Judaism for thousands of years, but it doesn't connect now. And so when I was doing my research for today's video or for today's live stream, you could see inside studying the history that there's truly just this disconnect. It's a modern thing. The things that people were mad about in the Bible are modern. Those topics weren't always the issues of the day.
Yeah. Intellectually, I mean, even as far back as, 1700s, you had people who really didn't want to believe in a God that demanded anything of them, particularly behaviorally. And not much has changed. And I don't want to be uncharitable, because I think that people have gotten often a version of Christianity. They've been taught or what is popularized in kind of the cheesy movies and stuff like that, where you're like, yeah, they don't want to take that seriously.
I can't agree. I couldn't agree more. There are things that he says that are cringeworthy to me because it doesn't represent my Christianity, but it does represent a mainstream version of Christianity.
He's kind of rejecting the Liberty University, and maybe that's not even fair, but
yeah, I don't think that would be fair. I mean,
he's rejecting the,
but he would still
often the Trump. I just have this picture of memes on Facebook of Trump. Bad time, but right, many times, like you were saying, it's often political. It's often the sense that they're rejecting a tribalism on one side, and so they embrace the opposite tribe. I will say the number of deconstructionists that I've interacted with, and this is just anecdotal. It's not something I can go and like pull quotes or anything, but anecdotally, the deconstructionists that I know personally, that I've interacted with online, they often have trauma associated with it, and they're rejecting the God of their parents, the God of a pastor who hurt them. And I know a lot of people, even in Anglicanism, who have told me that finding what they view as kind of a more historic rooted tradition saved them, because they were rebelling or rejecting against kind of the shallow mega church evangelicalism of their parents, and they had got really burned out. And so I think there's a lot of emotions that go into this.
Well, okay, so let's break that down for a second. Agreed. The problem that I have is that the other side wants to say, the critical scholars wants to say, like, they don't have that influencing them. There's this view of academia that it is heartless. It's just wherever the evidence leads. I'm sorry, there is no neutrality. You cannot study the topic in a neutral sense. The movement in and of itself, I don't think, was neutral. It's being played out today is not neutral. One of the future episodes that we're going to do, specifically on 519, is addressing a deconstructionist named Tim Whitaker, who talks about his deconstruction, there's a name for it. It's like opposite of conversion. Deconversion.
And even that language is protecting oneself from the terminology of apostasy. I have noticed that
well, okay. Don't get me too far off track here.
What I specialize in.
What he does in the video, I don't think I'm giving too much away, hopefully it will tease you to watch the show, is he describes himself as, I was a real Christian. I was all in. And then you watch the video and the way that he talks about things and the things that caught him up. He met a homosexual at a job that he took at Starbucks. I mean, you could not make that more stereotypical. That's really rough. I mean, it was difficult to watch. Don't go off. No tangent. Hold on.
What did you expect at Starbucks?
And he was like, well, I realized he was a real person. Well, what? Did you not think that they were? Like, I don't, like, I never thought that they weren't real people. It's such a caricature. And this is an issue with raising children that parents need to understand.
Yeah.
Don't caricature what you consider sin.
Have a real conversation about why we don't believe that this is right.
Right.
But also be loving and be honest and loving and respectful to other people.
Well, what I found funny is he goes, you know, he's a big political guy. Like he's really frustrated in the evangelicals and how they handle politics. And he goes, you know, you're going to love this. You know, they didn't really talk about politics from the pulpit, but we had Rush Limbaugh on every day. And I was like, okay, so, you know,
I feel that.
Please don't caricature evangelicalism into those views. And I'm not trying to say that I don't like or didn't like Rush Limbaugh. I'm not even saying that.
Also not a Christian.
I'm just, well, that was the thing. It was like, why would that be what was tied to it? And often you hear the phrases like, well, it is often tied to it, or they're often equated. But that doesn't mean that they are equal.
That's the tribalism there.
Yeah. And so, I feel like I'm off task here, but the point really is that you watched him and he got into playing music. I can relate to that. I watched his story and I said, we went on the same trajectory to the T. Him and I watched it and I went, oh, this is a little spooky. And I'm going to just tell the story real quick. Basically, the trajectory is that he grew up, was homeschooled for a while, went to a small Christian school, was taught fundamentalism. He didn't grow up in a Pentecostal church, which I did, but then had exposure to it later, and was big into music. And here's where it veered. Okay. You could tell that even when he talked about being so into Christianity and just, it was also an identity for him. All of his friends were Christian. All of his friends revolved around the church. But then he was introduced to secular music. And now all of a sudden he's completely tatted up, mohawk. So there's this thing where he's showing a real sign. And I don't want to judge somebody and say I know their motives. But if I'm looking for flags, I see flags all over for this guy. And he is the stereotypical deconstructionist. That's why I'm using him as an example. He's a public figure. He has every right to be criticized. And I sat there and I watched him. I'm like, so this is where two things happen. I got into where I realized that evangelicalism was shallow, and I dug in deeper. I said, I can't hold God accountable for the fact that evangelicalism has become shallow. So I went deep, right? I mean, and you were around when this was happening. I was reading, I was studying, I was doing all I possibly could. He just kind of retracted into this secular realm, right? Okay, yeah. Music, right? Then
tattoos.
went to no, I wasn't criticizing. So by the way, I'm not a fan of tattoos. That's a totally different topic. I'm not criticizing anybody that has them. When he said that he got them, he said it was because of Travis Barker of Blink-182. That's what I mean. Like,
been there. No.
I've known you for a long time. I don't recall that period of time.
Not that big of a Blink-182 fan.
That's not the point. You didn't get tattoos because somebody in a rock band got them. You have a tattoo of a rock band on your arm.
I've made a lot of friends that way, by the way.
Okay, that's what you call rationalization. That's what insane people do. Anyways, no, follow me though, right? Everything he's doing is normally, or it seems to be for that attention, for that to be in a group. And what happened is when he got older and he got into a bigger arena, he goes, well, if I stay here, I'm going to be restricted. And what did he immediately do? He started changing his views to fit it. And he sought out
Yeah.
How can I rationalize how I'm feeling? Sorry, I did the exact opposite.
Well, first of all, the number of people, I mean, I've had people literally tell me, I didn't want to feel bad for committing this sin or that sin. I didn't want to feel guilt all the time for doing what I wanted to do. And the number of times when it is ethically, morally based, they are changing their views of the universe and God because they want to do X, Y, or Z. But beyond that, like I said, there's often trauma associated with it.
What do you mean by that, though? Let's not be vague.
No, there's daddy issues, mommy issues.
That's still vague.
And
what do you mean? Because I'm actually being serious here for a second, because nobody here is downplaying SA, okay? I hate to have to use those terms, right? We're not downplaying real issues.
No, absolutely not.
I don't want that to come across that way, and I am going to be extremely clear on that.
I think there are...
But let's talk about the things that get equated with that are not that. Because that is almost as big of a crime as the crime itself, is when you're going to equate something to something that is truly heinous. So
I think when I've known people who, whether they're self-aware of it or not, are rejecting the God of their parents. And I'm often like, yeah, I reject that God too, because that's not the real God. And also their experience with Christianity growing up, being very, very sheltered, basically being raised in an environment of fear where we don't go outside this box, and we don't intellectually, relationally, right? We don't, if you have never met somebody who is not a Christian, who is a homosexual, is something like that, in your entire life until you're an adult and you go out, that your parents really haven't prepared you for interacting with the world.
Well, we're not trying to tell them that they should go out to a gay bar and introduce them to them. I mean,
no. There is an organic and appropriate way to do that. Now, as a father of 4, I will tell you that is one of the most difficult things. How do you do that? How do you have honest conversations with your kids? How do you expose them to reality, but try and walk with them through those things, and to help them understand how God views these things? And yet at the same time, you want to be respectful. You want to protect your kids from
unnecessary exposure. I mean, well, that's the thing. Yeah. I think let's tie this thing all back together here, because we've gone down 2 tracks, and I want to make sure that people are clear on this. If you've watched Kelvin's Faith Unfiltered, ton of content that is revolving around critical scholarship. Why? Well, what we've been talking about now, the deconstructionist movement, those are linked so closely together. They are interlocked. I had to get both analogies in there once I started. That they feed each other. Okay, so inside of deconstructionism, there's an emotionalism that's tied to that movement. Deconstruction. Maybe we should give a slight explanation what that is. Deconstruction is the idea. I'd love to give the whole history, because the term in its original use and what it's actually used for now are similar, but not the same. But the idea is people started saying, and it became really popular recently, I deconstructed my faith, meaning I broke it down, and the things that I was told I had to believe and thought I was supposed to believe, the faith of my youth, I broke it down and got rid of that which wasn't working and kind of kept what I wanted to keep and changed.
It's certainly a very individualistic concept.
It is, right. But now let's tie it back to why I go after people like Tim Whitaker and CJ, however you pronounce his last name, and Dan McClellan.
It's Cornthwaite. I wouldn't swear to it though.
Did you practice? I just have to ask. Did you practice all week not going into the higher register when you said it?
I did not.
Okay. Is because the connection between that, all deconstructionists have gotten a hold of these scholars and used that to justify their deconstruction. So let me give you an example. A common course or path that you would see, okay, is, well, I don't like the faith of my parents. I don't think it's consistent. That's a thing. Oh, they're hypocrites, right? They say they preach love, but it isn't love. Yeah. Right down through the line. I don't agree with their political alignment. And then they go to find, well, how do I justify that feeling? Well, there's a whole batch of critical scholars waiting to tell you why the Bible is basically a book of contradictions. That is a book written by humans and humans only. It is a religious development over time that changed, and you don't need to be bound by that. That's the course right there. That's the headline, right? It is basically the idea that when I need an out from being accountable to God and His Word, critical scholarship is there waiting in the wings to help me make that transition. Quick break. Let me kind of give you an outline of what's going on. So, what we have coming up. Next week, we will not have a live show, even though every Tuesday we are going live in some way, shape, or form, either Cloud and Fire or Live Fire. So next week, though, we do have a very special video coming out at the same time. So make sure that you jump on and check it out. It is our second reaction video to John Hagee. And I am really excited about that because that actually segues into our May 5th episode of Cloud and Fire, which Josiah will be joining us again, of course. And we will be talking about who are the children of God, who are God's people. That has a lot of implications concerning both politics and theology, especially the thing that we've been talking about the most, which is eschatology. So please make sure that you check out both the episode that drops on 4/28 and our live show on 5/5. The following week will be Live Fire. That is going to be a surprise episode because we're not real sure where we're going with that one yet. Hopefully by 5/5 we will be able to tell you about that. The following week, which is 5/19, Tuesday again at 8 o'clock on our YouTube channel, we will be doing a live, which is the first time we've done this, reaction to Tim Whitaker's, basically his description of his deconstruction. So really ties into what we're talking about today. I'm really looking forward to that. So please make sure that you check those out and put those on your calendars. And we hope to see you then. So back to our regularly scheduled programming. So yeah, that's the tie-in. Why are we talking about these two things? They're forever intertwined. I think that critical scholarship has been the biggest contribution to deconstruction. Education is a big part of that, right? We go off to school. That's what's undergirding it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the so-called neutrality that is so attractive to many of these young people. Again, if you grew up in a culture of fear of ideas that aren't what you agree with, fear of reading the books that aren't by your authors. And I can attest to that because growing up, we didn't read books by theologians who weren't from our ilk, right?
Wait, let's stop there. Hold on. I want to, I've heard no one's going to say something that really is going to catch me off guard inside of this deconstruction movement. There is hatred of children towards parents because they sheltered them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Do you want to give your children bread or do you want to give them a buffet of vipers?
Yeah, like I said, that's one of the most difficult things to balance out. But I think it's more about the attitude, and it's more about having.
I don't think I want to disagree. And you know why? I think it's because the parents aren't trained to actually deal with the actual issues. I mean,
No, that's exactly right.
When Amber and I sat and made the decision to try to have, to ask for the Lord's blessing to have a baby, I said, okay, we're going to have, like, our life is going to change. You know, I mean, I've been a student of the word for years now, but I literally started writing immediately and developing what I called Thoughts of My Father, which was for her, so that I could explain the philosophical and the systematic way to approach these issues. I don't think that fathers today do that. I don't think they take that as seriously, and they rely on the rod as opposed to the word. And I think that's something we need to adjust. If you expect, you may have it worked out in your head, but you need to work on explaining it and teaching it and passing it on. We talk about this post-millennialist. I want to pass on these things.
Yeah.
And that means you have to work them out. You can't just hear a preacher say it and then be like, okay, that's good in my head. No, you need to ponder it. You need to think in terms of just how am I going to teach this? And I don't think that fundamentalism really lived in an era of darkness and didn't pass that on.
No, I agree, absolutely. I think of one situation. I was talking to a gentleman, and it was actually his priest. He was raised Roman Catholic. His priest, when he asked him, when he had asked his priest questions, his priest was basically like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter," or "Yeah, don't worry about it." And just really didn't engage with the questions. And this young man was like, "Well, that was it for me." And so and that's where I say, if it's a culture of fear of confronting ideas, it's not that, hey, here's what we believe, here's what we believe is wrong. No, we're not going to have that conversation. I guess that's what I mean, is we're not going to talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, and you can have it kind of, you can have, how do I want to say this? You can have somebody who goes, I'm not going to talk about it. That's problematic. Then you can have somebody who goes, yeah, let's talk about it, and then not know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that we have more of that. It
think
depends on what generation.
I think a lot of people don't talk about it because, again, they're just afraid.
That's a personality trait. The true bottom line is ignorance on the topic.
Yeah.
Right. And inside of the evangelical and fundamentalist movement, there is a "Thus saith the Lord," and it's not always "Thus saith the Lord." It's "Thus saith my pastor."
Pastor Bob.
And that is probably a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Right?
Absolutely.
There's a cult of personality inside of these movements. And I mean, so what are we talking about? This is the thing that neither one of us can relate to. We never grew up in it, and we never participated in it. I mean, even when I was inside of the Pentecostal dispensational evangelical fundamentalism, it was a smaller version of it. I didn't go to mega churches. I've never been to a mega church. I mean, the closest thing to mega church is the church I go to now, and it's Reformed. The number obviously doesn't dictate that, but when you have the guy who's pounding the pulpit looking for money, there's problems that come out of that. So
I also think there's, and this is more on the deconstruction front, there's also a lot of people who feel like the way that they were taught to behave was based on appearance to the world. Parents who want their kids to look a certain way, to act a certain way, so everybody thinks that they have well-behaved kids. And there's a sense in which if we don't take the time, and if we really don't care about the hearts of our children, if we don't really care if our children love God and we're just looking for conformity,
Oh, no, wait a minute here. Hold on, Mr. Anglican. I'm pretty sure there is still an idea of, what is the word that you guys use?
Formation.
Formation. So, I mean, that's the thing. Everyone jumps the gun. I'm not saying you were. Everyone jumps the gun and goes, well, if somebody wants their kids to behave and look a certain way, they don't care about the heart.
No, that's
and we have to be careful on that line.
Not where I'm going with that. No.
I know it's not where you're going. I'm waiting for someone to think that. Like, that's not what you're saying. We're not saying to have unruly kids that look like hoodlums. We're saying something beyond that we're going to teach them formation, because it doesn't matter what denomination you are, you have some form of formation.
Yeah.
But you're not going to leave
they're formed or they're malformed.
You should not have rules. We have a rule in our house. If you're going to lay down a rule, explain why.
Yeah.
Now, the kid doesn't get to ask why to get out of it, meaning they can't be like, well, I don't agree with you, but I have no issue explaining why I'm saying it.
But it's a rules and relationship, dynamic. You don't want rules over relationship. Relationship doesn't mean you don't have rules. And yeah, that at the end of the day, the parents are responsible to teach their children how to behave, but they're also supposed to do that in a way that is number one, giving them an example of what it means to live for God, but also having open dialogue about why we do what we do. And at the end of the day, thinking long-term about trying to present their children to God, and the goal is to the goal is to shepherd these children that God has placed in your hands.
We really have gone down like this is a child rearing course. That wasn't the intent, but in all reality, where is the breakdown? It normally is in kids as they're sent off to university, where they're first getting exposed to this.
Did you just say university like the Brits?
I don't know.
To university.
I do listen to a lot of those guys.
That was a terrible accent.
It was. So let's kind of bring this into a close. The idea that we're trying to talk about, and we've got off on a lot of different tangents, but the truth is there is bias inside of this, and we need to watch out for terms like consensus. Scholarly consensus. One of the things that I love to say is if someone actually, puts that into a comment, I say, can you explain it? I didn't say, don't have to defend it. Just explain it. Tell me why the scholarly consensus is this. History is not science, and we need to remember that. So this isn't something when someone says, Paul didn't write, and please go check out my series on critical scholarship and the pastoral epistles, because the arguments are pretty flimsy. Now I'm giving you a 20,000 foot view of that topic, but they're not nearly as scientific as what we want them to be. And when critical scholarship makes their biggest mistakes, it's when they overreach beyond their actual field, and they move from the realm of, well, this seems improbable to this is impossible.
I guess just getting back to the video, the idea that scholarship today at your average secular university, that there are no biases, that there's no pressure to believe one way or the other about any given topic, that just, to me, it's a little bit absurd. We all have biases, and that's why as presuppositionalists, we believe strongly in discussing why we have the biases that we have. It's not about trying to deny them. It's about being self-aware and understanding what is the foundation for our worldview. We want to be epistemologically self-conscious. I didn't even practice that. I just just came to me. No. That was really the takeaway from the video, that like I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about some of these details. Number one, I'm not capable of that, right? I've not done that study. But the idea that you would just basically say that any scholar, any academic who is operating at a school that has a statement of faith is by default not a true scholar clearly shows your bias.
Yeah, and that was the claim. And one of the things that you said that I thought was, that you brought up that I wish that we spent more time on, was the idea that there was an entitlement. If you went to university and you do good scholarship, you should be employed. And it was almost this idea as though the secular world doesn't have that same criteria. You have to accept their statement of faith. I mean, we had Dr. Marcus Ross on, who was talking about how difficult it was as a young earth creationist. And I'm not even promoting that view. I'm just saying it was a fact that it's you have to do more work to be able to advance. And then you have a liberal scholar come on and basically like, poor me. Oh, I can't get a job at a fundamentalist university. Why would you want one there? I mean, why would you want that? It doesn't make any sense. So with that said, we have to go to the big finish. Thank you guys so much for watching. Pay attention to how the game is played. One of the key tools used is the term consensus. You'll hear it constantly. The consensus of scholars, as if scholarship is 10 men in a room who all raised their hands and agreed. Or maybe even worse, it's 1,000 men in a room who all agreed. That's not what scholarship is. Scholarship is massive, it's diverse, and there are serious minority reports with serious arguments that never get mentioned when someone invokes consensus. When a well-argued minority position exists and is simply excluded from the conversation, consensus isn't a conclusion, it's a filter. And you should ask yourself, what is it filtering out and why? Because here's what nobody in the world wants to admit. Everyone comes to the text with presuppositions. Everyone. The claim from critical scholarship is that conservative scholars are burdened by dogmatism, that their faith commitments prevent them from taking the Bible on its own terms, that they can't be trusted to follow the evidence because they already know where they need it to land. But let's look at what critical scholarship brings to the table. Their framework has a default setting. That default setting is natural historical explanation. Every time. Which means before they read a single word of the text, the framework has already determined what kind of answer is acceptable. That's a presupposition, and it's one they rarely have to defend because it's dressed up in the language of academic objectivity. Now, I want to be clear about something. I can't speak for everyone who claims to be a conservative scholar, but I know that there are good scholars out there who are not ignoring the hard questions and still come to the conservative conclusion. They don't flatline everything and pretend the difficulties aren't there. They just believe there are ways to synchronize scripture. They believe that genre, context, and complementary perspectives can answer the questions that critical scholarship uses to dismantle the text. These scholars see the complexity without throwing out the document. The truth is both have biases and frameworks. Now, let's talk about evidence, because this is where it gets interesting. Liberal scholarship demands greater evidence for miracles. That might sound fair to you, but here's the deal. The evidence available for 12 men sitting in a room eating a meal is the exact same kind of evidence available for one of those men walking out of the tomb 3 days later. God chose to change the course of human history, not through an empire, not through an army, and not through the kind of institutional power that leaves behind the stone and marble record that makes scholars comfortable. He chose a laborer from Galilee who became an itinerant preacher with 12 followers, and the movement that followed turned the world upside down, something critical scholarship often doesn't take into account. So when someone tells you they're pursuing the truth, watch what they do with the evidence they don't like. Watch who they dismiss before the argument is even made. And until next time, stay shaped by reason, guided by faith, and grounded in Christ. Take it easy.